Well, in our limited time, let's turn to diplomacy that Russia is conducting in Syria.
Well, exactly. I mean, speaking of possible truces, negotiations to end military conflict that has plunged, at least one country into chaos and has really burdened neighboring countries with innumerable refugees. I mean, we can count them maybe around 7 million total. Is of course the forgotten Syria conflict, which has been off the front page news for a while, but has been simmering along in a kind of unhappy stalemate where it's clear that the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad is not going to be toppled. I mean, it doesn't control all of its former territory, but it clearly, does some of the major urban populations and is not going to be toppled. And to that end, you've seen that the United Arab Emirates, for example, that really was supporting the Syrian opposition, is now moving to diplomatic relations as well. So there's a realignment starting to take place in the region as a whole, that is having consequences now for the possibility of a deal to end the Syrian conflict. And the biggest component of this is, for the first time, Turkey having diplomatic engagement with the Assad government that started with, intelligence service, transferring information. This has been going on, at moments of cooperation before, but now with the defense ministers meeting. So the Turkey's defense minister met the Syrian defense minister on December 28th. It was billed as a very surprise meeting because I think they didn't do a lot of announcing it, but they met under the auspices of Russian negotiations and diplomatic kind of brokering. And they met in Moscow as a kind of trilateral way of engaging in high-level talks. And Erdogan today mentioned, I believe it was today, just a few hours ago, mentioned that there might be the possibility of, him meeting Assad as well, once, the foreign ministers meet and so on. Now, what's happening here, it seems to me, is part of this realignment that's taking place in the region. Saudis met with Xi Jinping. Okay, they did not go along with Biden's call for increased oil production. We've been talking about this, that they, started acting a little bit more independently. And what's happening is, and I watched a really interesting interview with Ibrahim Kalin on Al Jazeera from last month. And Ibrahim Kalin is Turkey, Erdogan's kind of presidential advisor and spokesperson. And he's a very articulate figure whose English is good. So he's able to communicate Turkish positions well to a Western audience on Al Jazeera in English. And, he seemed to be alluding to the fact that Turkey is having overtures now to reconcile with Egypt. They were strong allies. Erdogan came out very strongly for the Morsi Muslim Brotherhood government and was unwilling to accept really the coup that toppled the first democratically elected government in Egypt's history. But now they're willing to talk with them. And there's overtures to UAE and Saudis that they've had very troubled relationships in the last decade or so because Turkey has been more in alignment with Qatar and this kind of Muslim Brotherhood kind of orientation in the region. And I think Turkey senses that people are a little unhappy with the U.S.'s interventions, interference, and demands that everybody has to be either with them or against them, and that they are trying to capitalize on this by, actually also figuring out a position in Syria that will be beneficial to them. They've been threatening a kind of invasion, you might say, in northern Syria to control a kind of 30-kilometer zone that they want to be, free of what they call these terrorist groups, i.e. Kurdish militias and the YPG militias, and also as a zone in which they might repatriate and resettle some of the 4 million refugees, Syrian refugees, in this kind of zone as a kind of Turkish loyal buffer sort of zone. And the reason why that is happening is because, Turkey is not a wealthy country, it's sort of a middle power. It's suffering 90%, inflation rate right now. And when Trump kind of put on in a fit of pique, put on, some sanctions on Turkey on its currency, it just got devalued so quickly. It was a disaster. So what's happening is that a lot of this economic, anxiety and instability in Turkey is manifesting in anti-Syrian refugee sentiment. Why have we taken on 4 million? And think about it, 4 million refugees. That's a lot. Turkey has a population, 70 million. That's a huge percentage to take on as refugees. But it is manifesting in opposition policies that say, hey, we should have a deal with Syria and we should have some of these Syrian refugees return to their homes. And, Erdogan was so precipitous in taking the side of the Syrian opposition and in the U.S. policy to support radical, jihadist militias to try and topple the government, the Assad government, that, it looked like there might never be any kind of rapprochement. He called, Assad a terrorist. He was remarkably intemperate, 6, 7, 8 years ago. So the fact that he's saying that there might be a possibility of meeting, I think it's to Turkey's interest that they're trying to realign their policy around a regional security, regional cooperation, isolate and marginalize the U.S., which is one of the big effects that would happen here. And they see that Iran is suffering major protests and instability. Their attention is, kind of on these internal questions. Russia is bogged down here in Ukraine. Two of the major patrons and allies of the Syrian government are a bit distracted. And this is one of the reasons why Russia itself has put pressure on Syria to actually go to these meetings, because Syria had been maintaining a position that they will not begin dialogue and discussion until Turkey withdraws all of its troops from their territory. That's a precondition. They've managed to go around this precondition. And I think the goal here seems to be to stop Turkey's impending intervention in the north and find a way in which they could broker a more sustainable peace that suits both parties. And, the U.S. has condemned this. The U.S. is, of course, supporting Kurdish militias and also says that it's there fighting ISIS.
Is it really?
Yeah. What's the evidence that they're fighting ISIS
in Syria? Did we go to the UN to get the world to agree to this? It seems like we're in a very weird situation up there. We seem to be, the U.S. government and the military industrial complex seems to be allied now only with Kurdish rebels in an area that happens to have Syrian oil. I'm sure that isn't a complete coincidence. And
wheat, yes, as well.
So what do you think if this alliance goes through? What is the prospect for the U.S. maintaining its military presence inside of Syria?
Much, much lower. I think, if Turkey and Syria manage to patch things up and come to some modus vivendi here, I think that spells pretty much the end for a viable U.S. military presence. It just takes two of the key combatants out of the equation, aligning together to focus on, removing U.S. influence. And I think Ibrahim Kalin, I think that's what he was very vague, but he said one thing at one moment when he was talking about all of these new realities and new conditions in the region that was encouraging opportunities to actually have productive relations with Egypt, with UAE, with Saudis. He said something very brief. He mentioned that, that some of these countries have expressed dissatisfaction with U.S. policy in the region, and so are kind of looking for other alternatives. And so I think what Turkey is interested in doing, it seems here, or Turkey, we should say, the State Department has just today announced, U.S. State Department, that it will start using the Turkey rather than Turkey, since there's been an official name change that happened.
So how do we pronounce it now? What is it?
Turkey.
Turkey.
Yeah, Turkey. And there's an umlaut over the U, but nobody expects Americans to actually be able to, say the umlaut, So it's just, if you just say Turkey, now you're probably good. But, the point there is that, Turkey is playing a kind of interesting diplomatic game here, where they're part of NATO, but that comes with their conditions and pursuit of their interests. They're willing to talk with the Russians and help broker diplomatic arrangements. But ultimately, what they most want, it seems, is, to establish some good working relations in the region and end some of the divisions that have been fomented principally by U.S. kind of intervention and creating these blocks. They're trying to overcome some of these blocks, not that they will resolve and everybody will be allies, but to try and find local regional solutions without the need to call upon the U.S. to broker them. And in some cases, sometimes they will look for China or Russia or other parties that they have good relations with and lots of trade and economic relations with to be those brokers, and not necessarily just have the U.S. be the broker for regional policy.
John Bolton doesn't like this at all.
He hates it. Yeah.
He is very upset.